where Heaney's seat of Treatham rests.
Tip-top says Joyce in Ulysses, where Shaw saw nature shine so kind, Rostrevor stirs the poet's mind. And Michael Longley's here this year, a precious honour that we share. His words of wisdom, joy and tears will help us weather down the years. Michael Longley.
Well, it's a few years since I've been in Rostrevor, and it's very nice to be back. And thank you, Billy, for inviting me and to be reading in this wonderful night. After all of this, I better be good. The worst thing about growing old is losing friends. And the first part of my reading will be 4 short poems for poet friends whom I miss. And then I'll move on later on in the reading to the compensation for growing old is grandchildren. And I'll be reading some poems inspired by them. Right. Yes, as I say, I miss terribly Derek Mahon, Seamus Heaney, Brendan Kennelly, and Ciaran Carson. Now, Edna and I were at a conference last weekend in Trinity about Derek, and his was the first important poetic friendship in my life, and we shared a tense, funny, hilarious apprenticeship in Trinity as undergraduates in the late 50s, early 60s. And my first book, No Continuing City, ends with a poem for Derek, and I'll read it. It's about 12 lines long. You alone read every birthmark. Only for you the tale it tells. Idiot children in the dark, whom we shall never bring to light. Criminals in their prison cells. These are the poems we cannot write. Though we deny them name and birth, locked out from rhyme and lexicon, the ghosts still gather round our hearth, whose bed and board makes up the whole. Thief, murderer and clown, icon and lares of the poet's soul. Callimachus, the ancient Greek poet, wrote an elegy for Heraclitus, not the great philosopher, but a minor poet. And there's a beautiful Victorian translation of it. They told me, Heraclitus, they told me you were dead. And the poem says that death will not take, that his poems are like nightingales which death won't touch. And this is a little poem I wrote for Heaney called Sedge Warblers. Callimachus joins me at your grave, who shed tears for Heraclitus, and said his poems were nightingales that death would never lay hands on. There are no nightingales in Ireland, but sedge warblers sometimes sing at night and are mistaken for nightingales. So death that snatches at everything will leave untouched in Balachi your poems, the sedge warbler's song. Now, Brendan Kennelly died just a few weeks ago. He was a year or two ahead of me at Trinity, and he was wonderfully encouraging. And he was, as you know, a larger-than-life, extraordinary man. And he died in Listowel, as I say, a couple of weeks ago. Now, in 1960, he and I were an army of student slaves who earned a bit of money in the summer in a canning factory, a hellhole in the middle of England. And we were put up in a drafty Nissen hut. And the beds weren't even assembled. They were just up against the wall. So you had to assemble the bed, these old iron beds, and then there were no mattresses, so you improvised a kind of mattress with cardboard boxes. And we were all very depressed, really, and homesick and missing our mummies. But who looked after us all was Brendan, this extraordinary sunburst of a man. And he was like a parent, you know that lovely Latin phrase, in loco parentis. He was in loco parentis. And I wrote this poem about him. It's 3 6-line stanzas. It's 18 lines long. And it ends with a lovely Scots word, hurlygush, which is the sound water makes as it splashes. The factory for Brendan Kennelly. I open a can of peas and I open up that factory, balancing on tons of pea vines and forking them out of the sky into machines. Millions of peas on a white conveyor belt, sleepy eyes, surfacing from a vat sunk into the floor, a gigantic iron shopping basket full of cans. The only student slave able for hard labour, Kennelly helps me assemble my rusty bed in a Nissen hut in the middle of vague England, and create out of cardboard boxes a mattress, there to collapse, aching, blistery, and waken at dawn to a blackbird on the corrugated iron. Kennelly's voice, long before children and wives, helping me feel at home amid the productive cacophony. Cans spiralling down from the roof. Already the tubby, rollicking, broken Christ, talking too much, drowning me in his hurlygush, which makes the sound water makes over stones. And The Rabbit is a poem which Cathal McCabe will know all about because he was there at its conception, if not its writing. And this happened in Poland, in Łódź, a rather grim place. It was Łódź, wasn't it, Cathal? Yes. Yeah. Ciaran and I were doing a little tour of Poland, and when Cathal was the British Council representative there looking after us, and Ciaran and I were on this train across Poland, and we crossed. There was a young couple, and they were very much in love. But the girl had on her lap a cardboard box, out of which emerged, this very, very beautiful grey rabbit. And it sat on her shoulders for a while, I remember. And you remember that thing young ladies used to do to improve their embouchure? Yeah, you would recite into the mirror every morning, prunes and prisms, prunes and prisms. Well, that's what this bloody rabbit was doing. Anyway, I dozed off. And during my sleepy absence, the young couple and the rabbit departed. And then later that night with Cahill, we were in a hotel bar, and we were the only people there apart from two prostitutes. And one was foxy thin, and the other had an heroic cleavage. And Ciaran was in a mood to sing and play his tin whistle, and which he did for about an hour. And I could see the girls looking at their watches, realizing that this Irish trio weren't being very good for business. And I remember Ciaran rustling one of her hair, the one with the cleavage, and then this is the poem. I also mentioned Silesian lettuce, which, as you all know, is especially nice lettuce, and the German word for the rabbit stew is Hassenpfeffer. So this is for you, Cahill, remembering an hilarious night. The rabbit for Ciaran Carson. I closed my eyes on a white horse pulling a plough in Poland, on a haystack built around a pole, and opened them when the young girl and her lover took out of a perforated cardboard shoebox a grey rabbit, an agreeable shitty smell, turds like a broken rosary, the slow train rocking this dainty manger scene, so that I, with a priestly forefinger, tried to tickle the narrow brain space behind dewdrop eyes. And it bounced from her lap, and from her shoulder kept mouthing prunes and prisms, as if to warn that even with so little to say for itself, a silly rabbit could pick up like a scent trail my gynecological concept of the warren with its entrances and innermost chamber, or the heroic survival in Warsaw's sewers of just one bunny saved as a pet or meal, or its afterlife as Hassenpfeffer with cloves and bay leaves, onions, enough. And so it would make its getaway when next I dozed crossing the Oder, somewhere in Silesia. Silesian lettuce, never to meet again. Or so I thought, until in Woolwich in the small hours, a fat, hilarious prostitute let that rabbit bob across her shoulders without tousling her hairdo, and burrow under her chin and nuzzle her ear as though it were crooning the groves of Blarney, or she walked unaware. Then in her cleavage it crouched as in a ploughed furrow, ears laid flat, pretending to be a stone, safe from stoat and fox. When remember at the opening of the John Hewitt pub in Belfast, Ciaran came up to me and he says, Longley, he says, I don't see myself as a friggin' rabbit. He says, and Ciaran had a stammer which really added to his charisma. It was lovely to hear him talk. He said, if I'm going to write a poem about you, what would you like to be? So I said, well, it's something like a badger or an otter. He says, no, friggin' chance. He said, I'm going to turn you into a mole. I have a drop of water. It's a very entertaining evening, isn't it? No, thank you so much. I think it was about 20 years ago, I did an anthology for Faber called 20th Century Irish Poems. And the guy that was the editor, a brilliant man called Paul Keegan, and he says, are you going to put in two of your own? I said, no, because I strongly believe anthologists should not include themselves. But if I were at that time to choose two poems, I think they would have been The Linen Industry and Ceasefire. And I'll read those two poems now. The Linen Industry, in some respects, is a kind of love poem to Northern Ireland, where the linen industry was such a key industry. Not anymore, although it may come back. You never know. And it's certainly one of my favourite materials, and it's partly a poem about that. The solving image in the poem is the bleach screen, whereas, when the linen had been woven, it would be laid out to bleach in the sun, so that a height of summer it would appear that there'd been a fall of snow. This poem is 6 quatrains, 24 lines, for those of you who are slow at mental arithmetic. The Linen Industry. Pulling up flax after the blue flowers have fallen, and laying our handfuls in the peaty water to rot those grasses to the bone, or building stooks that recall the skirts of an invisible dancer. We become a part of the linen industry and follow its processes to the grubby town, where fields are compacted into window boxes and there is little room among the big machines. But even in our attic under the skylight, we make love on a bleach green, the whole meadow draped with material turning white in the sun, as though snow reluctant to melt were our attire. What's passion but a battering of stubborn stalks, then a gentle combing out of fibres like hair, and a weaving of these into christening robes, into garments for a marriage or funeral. Since it's like a bereavement, once the labour's done, to find ourselves last workers in a dying trade. Let flax be our matchmaker, our undertaker, the provider of sheets for whatever the bed. And be shy of your breasts in the presence of death. Say that you look more beautiful in linen, wearing white petticoats, the bow on your bodice, a butterfly attending the embroidered flowers. Now, Tommy was kind enough to mention this poem. It's probably my best known poem, and it was in '94 when there were rumours that there would be an IRA ceasefire. And I was reading at that time the book, I've forgotten what number it was, when old Doddery King Priam visits the tent, plucks up courage and visits the tent of Achilles to beg for the body of his son Hector, whom Achilles has killed in combat. And the old king reminds the great general of his own father, and therefore the more civilized, more feminine, gentle side of Achilles, which he's had to submerge in order to be a great general, comes out again. I think the Iliad's our greatest poem about war and death, and that the soul of this great poem is this episode. And it helped me when I was writing it to give Priam a face, and I gave him the face of Gordon Wilson, the Enniskillen draper, who you remember, I'm sure. It's a sonnet, ceasefire. Put in mind of his own father and moved to tears, Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam curled up at his feet and wept with him until their sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed and, for the old king's sake, laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry, wrapped like a present, home to Troy at daybreak. When they'd eaten together, it pleased them both to stare at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles built like a god, Priam good-looking still and full of conversation, who earlier had sighed, I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son.